I give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Diane Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it? We're still here, but the conversation is still good. So that's why we look exactly the same.
Yes.
For those who are seeing us on video.
Somebody asked me the other day, they're like, do you change your shirt? Do you, change your, and I was like, no, we don't. So
we're talking. And then y'all get what we talk.
The most I do is switch and move the logo around. That's the most I do. So, this is the behind the scenes. We record, multiple episodes at a time. So ain't nobody got time to go doing all the
no. And when the conversation is good, it's about the conversation, not about the way that we look. But we look good, doesn't matter. So don't matter. Tell me the story about Kamar.
I wanted to share with you. I went. I had an interesting experience today. So I went to a bank, a local bank, to open a new account. I'm helping a family in Gaza raise money to try to evacuate and needed to open an account for that purpose. So I went to this local bank to do it. And there was a gentleman outside. He was kind of hanging out by the ATM machine, a security guard. He had his uniform on. And he said hi to me when I walked in. And I said hi and went in and did my business. And when I came back out, he asked me, he said, is that your car? And I said, yes. And he said, what does your sign say? Because he was standing over by the building and I had parked, I don't know how many yards away. I'm horrible with distance, but you couldn't really read what my sign is. And I have a sign in the back window on the driver's side that says free Palestine, free Sudan, free Congo, free Haiti, free ourselves. And then it talks about
free ourselves, yes.
Yeah, and how, and nobody's free until everybody's free and that kind of thing. And so he saw the free part, but he couldn't really read what was the rest of the words. And he thought it said free America or free United States or something like that. So he asked me, he's like, is that your car? And I said, yeah. And he said, what does that sign say? And I said, well, it says free Palestine and free Congo. And I told him what it said. And he's like, oh, I thought it said free America. And he said, we ain't free. And I said, oh, no, we're not. And no, I'm never going to have a free America on my car. Yeah. So then we engaged in dialogue and I had my earrings on. And so, we were talking, I said, I'm always advocating for Palestine. And so I put that sign in my car to try to, hopefully someone will read it and maybe it'll spark a change in their mindset. And so we just started talking and it was really interesting. He is a gentleman that during our dialogue shared with me that he was originally from Jamaica.
Okay, well, go on, Jamaicans. Yeah. Big up, big up.
Told him about you, and I told him about
vibes. And I love that because a Jamaican is going to ask you, hold on though, a Black American might not ask what is on that car, but a Jamaican is definitely going to stand in what their value system is and ask. So I'm just doing a plug for my Jamaican
family. He did. Yes, he did. And we had, his name is Kamar. So shout out Kamar. And he actually said that he would love to come on the podcast sometime. And I said, absolutely, we would love to have you on. So we may end up having a future episode with Kamar as a guest speaker with us. But he was asking me, we started out talking about the United States and their complicity in the genocide in Gaza. And it was interesting. He said, and I'm sorry, Kamar, I'm going to paraphrase everything that you told me. So this is how I heard it. If it's not exactly right, we'll have to have you on so you can correct me. But his first premise was that he felt like somebody else was pulling the strings, that our government officials didn't have the power to do things differently than they were doing, almost supposing that they would do something different if they could, but that there was he called it a higher power. So I asked him for clarification. I said, do you mean higher power like spiritually or somebody that's got more power than this? And he said, no, he said, I think there's somebody else pulling the strings. And so I said, well, maybe Putin, I mean, we do know that they have, but I challenged him. I was like, I'm not sure that's really true. I said, I think most of the people that are in our government are perfectly, on many levels okay with what's happening because it keeps their power structure in place in a lot of ways. And so we talked about um, whether in the past when we had a lower, middle, and upper class, he was kind of suggesting that we have that now. And I said, well, we don't really have a middle class. We have more of a, poor and low wealth folks, and then we have the very rich. And I said, they've gotten rid of the middle class because that didn't work for them. And he said, yeah, because the middle class was saving their money and they were doing things and they weren't really paying, and I said, yeah, they took the power away from the government. So that's why they didn't want it and they got rid of it. But it was an interesting dialogue. I did ask him eventually, recognized his accent and asked him where he's from, and he told me Jamaica. But I didn't get into like how long he had been in the United States and what his take on things were. But we talked about white supremacy and we talked about how it permeates everything. And it was a really
Good
great
conversation.
conversation. So
Yeah, I know it was a good conversation. I know it was. Some of the things I just want to go to this, who is controlling our government?
mm,
And if we're talking about a higher power, I do resonate with what Kamar is saying because I believe that most of our political actors at this point in time are really directed by how funding goes and like
oh
how and
sure.
who's
Yes.
in their pockets, right? And
Yes.
so
Yeah.
there's also a knowledge about like the oligarchy that sits and exists and does feed and fester into the funds. Like we actually saw it on a global platform, this engagement between Donald Trump and Elon Musk, right?
Mhm.
Somebody who has a lot of money, who was able to impact our elections, who was then able to impact policy, who was able to like have an entire department erected in our government
Yeah.
because that person has money and that money allowed them a certain amount of access. So I do think that there's Koch brother, um, and there's a whole bunch of names. Just Koch is the banking family that comes to mind
Yeah, the Koch brothers. Yeah,
as the
yeah,
Rothschilds.
yeah.
Okay, I'm saying Koch. That's that. That might be that might be that New York. You know,
Oh,
we
right,
call
Bear Koch. Right,
the
right,
Koch,
right. Yeah,
right, or the
yeah,
Mayor
yeah,
Koch. So
yeah.
the Koch brothers or the Rothschilds, those people do hold a certain amount of power that does transcend above our
Yes.
political positions, and
APAC,
they do transcend
is a
above our
good
political
example of that.
positions because they are holding our banking systems, the way that we do capitalism across the globe. And
Mhm,
so if Brother Kamar was talking about that, then
mhm.
that is, I do agree with him that
Yes.
the US does not really exist in a true democracy. I don't know what country or what place actually exists in a true democracy because we do have these inequalities in capital and access to resource.
Hmm.
That's really, really very strong. And then with the impact of that is what we see in our social divide with like what we have as a middle class being eroded completely
Right.
because the wealth gap is growing greatly because technology, because capitalism, because resource, because supply and demand is changing as we develop more industry. Because industry is looking different. And that's why I had to like stop for a second because industry also is looking like TikTok now, where people are like making money and that's like a stream of economy and people are like actually putting their time and their energy and that is the work that they're doing. Industry as far as like people using their hands in the same way or service industry that is changing so drastically. Entertainment industry and the way that entertainers and the distributors make money, all of that stuff is changing so drastically because of technology, which is eroding that middle class and is creating this huge wealth gap that we need to be thinking about in our capitalistic systems, which is why capitalism is not going to be able to sustain itself because you do need that ecosystem of folks existing. You cannot in capitalism have just those with the very few percent with so much resource and wealth, and then the 99% not having any type of resource of wealth because the supply and demand is not going to level itself out to be able to maintain the capitalistic structure.
Right. Right. Yeah, I agree with you that yes, there's absolutely systems. I mean, APAC, the Israeli
Hmm.
lobby is first and foremost in people's minds these days about their level of power over the people
Mhm.
in levels of power in those elected official capacities. And I would imagine that some of the people that go into elected office, especially at the national level, want to, I'm going to give grace to say that some of them want to make change, some of them want to make the world a better place, maybe on some level, but I just I don't want to give them a pass to say they're controlled by these entities that have given them money to get them into their place of power, but they chose to take that money. They chose to sign that
Yes.
contract with the devil, and that was a choice that they made. And you can argue
Yes.
that our system is set up that if they didn't make that choice, that they wouldn't have gotten elected in the first place. And if they're not in office, then they can't do any good. I know that it's a slippery slope, and I know
Mm.
that it's that all of those things can be true, right? That if they don't get into office, they can't do any good. But we continue to give these lobby entities and the donor class. That was something that that's a phrase that I really appreciate,
Yeah.
because
Hmm.
speaks to, that is a classification of people, a group of people that have all the power and are pulling the strings and do dictate what, the fact that Cory Booker could, set a record on the Senate floor filibustering and make such a big deal about that, go for hours and hours and hours and hours speaking, never mention Palestine or Gaza once, and then when his constituent gets taken from one of the Freedom Flotilla boats and is being kept in an Israeli prison, he says nothing, and that's only because he takes millions of dollars from AIPAC. So he people I used to look at Cory Booker as a good guy. I used to look at him as a guy who had a conscience, and maybe I was wrong in that for at all. But now I just see him as being a lackey, for the Israeli lobby. And so we do have a system that propagates this. We have
They
our,
do.
our House of Representatives, our federal representatives. We have, multiples from different states depending on their population. To those of you who are not in the U.S., um, and they only serve for 2 years. So the moment they get in office, they have to start fundraising for their next
Mhm.
election, and that is a setup for them to be beholden to all
Their
of
incentive,
that they're
that
begging
is it.
money from. I
So
mean,
I think that that's what Kamar was talking about. I mean, I don't
yeah,
know if he was able to articulate it in the moment that y'all were talking at the door of the
yeah,
bank.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's
yeah.
interesting that you were having this conversation at the bank, right?
The bank,
We were talking
outside,
about
right in front of the
exchanges of
bank.
money
Yeah,
and capitalism. You know what I mean?
yeah,
But yes, like so there is like yes, you have the hope of civil servants will go into office and really do the bidding of the constituents that they have. But
yeah,
we also have the reality that the amount of power that they have comes from what is the backing of their political agenda and
right.
who is backing that political agenda to move forward. And a lot of the folks that are, well, I'm not going to speculate. I'm just going to retract that before I even say it out of my mouth. I'm not going to, but who are powering those things? And you have to, you people as they are moving in their office are taking in consideration those things. And I know that firsthand because I was on Capitol Hill many moons ago, and I had the experience of seeing how legislation got passed, right? And that experience was set up a wine and cheese cart and go in and basically wine and cheese people into signing legislation, like
Yeah,
signing into in support of co-sponsorship of legislation. And that's like when I learned that that's how our policies got enacted, I was became really an advocate of civic engagement, so that when there are these little wine and cheese co-sponsorship signing, that you've heard from your constituents to know whether or not you actually want to sign on that legislation.
right.
That's very, very real. Like for those who don't think that we do have some type of opportunity to impact, as much as the money has opportunity to impact, also us getting together and organized as public body and a public voice does
Mhm.
have an impact, because it's really hard for somebody to sign some type of legislation. It might not be so much now, but it's hard for someone to sign some legislation when 90% of their constituents have wrote in and said, we want this and that. And that they have to take that back to the people who are
Wish it was
funding them and say,
harder.
I have to make some type of
I wish it was
negotiation.
harder. Yeah, I wish. I mean, because there are so many things right now that that for past administrations have got high numbers of percentages of the American people that want them, like family medical leave and universal health care and these things that our constituents have said that we want. That any poll that you do shows that they're polling in the 70s and the 80%, sometimes in the 90 percentile, and
Hmm.
yet you just they don't get done. And so
That's true.
I I wish that the constituents, I mean, I'm not saying don't to stop calling, right? We need to keep calling our
Gotta call.
elected officials. We got to
Gotta be civically engaged,
keep, yeah,
however that works
gotta
for you.
keep,
Hmm.
because one of the biggest hurdles that I think is in place now that makes it so challenging for us to break through that wall is the money in politics, as Citizens
Hmm.
United and the ability for corporations, CEOs of corporations, to influence our elected officials. And as soon as Citizens United got passed, and it was just Katie bar the door in terms of how much money any of these corporations could give to their elected officials, it really it squelched the voice
Hmm.
of the people and of the
And if
people.
we can speak into like an understanding about like what Citizens United is, what it did is it allowed corporations to act as a person,
People.
represent as a person. And the
Right,
corporation obviously has much more political power because it's a corporation with a lot of funding,
right.
different from people organizing together. And so that having a voice in what legislation gets passed then allows for that to be kind of who is pushing forward the policies.
Yeah, before Citizens United, just for those, it's a very short. I mean, I don't know all the details, the year and all of that stuff. I'd have to do all the Googles to get all those deets. But
Oh,
before
it's
Citizens
decent.
United, only humans, only people could give donations to elected,
Hmm.
people that were campaigning for office.
That
Um,
is it.
and after Citizens United, which was enacted by or upheld by the Supreme Court, now corporations like Walmart and Target and and the oil companies and the
And those are not Citizens United.
big pharmaceuticals and yeah, those are
Yes.
not citizens. Those are
No, not at all.
corporations,
Hmm.
and so that was when the money into the our elected campaigns just exploded and became impossible to stem. And so yeah, so I don't I'm so frustrated and saddened by how difficult it is for constituents to get through to their elected officials anymore, because we can call and call and call and call and let them know that we want them to do something different, and that we
Hmm.
still should do that because that's the only real avenue we've got, is to be civically engaged. And but then I get frustrated because it's like, but still, even when they know their constituents want them to pass and to bring these bills forward
Yeah,
for
this corporation that doesn't want it.
they just don't do it. So yeah, I don't know. It's
People
very,
over property. Like if you're out on the streets, people over property, people over property
well,
all day.
policing is always
That's
property over people. It's always property
yeah,
over people, and
yes,
any of our current systems is property over people. It's not about
yeah,
people. It's not about protecting people.
yeah. And,
So,
and hopefully that we could flip that. And one of the ways that I'm thinking that we can, just going full circle on this conversation, is that what a beautiful opportunity to be in community where someone can engage you, ask you about what is on your car and like your what your perspective is on it. And
mhm,
then you guys have like this rich conversation about what that looks like. And I think that the more we do those type of things in community, those one-on-one conversations with another human being, to engage them, to hear what their thought process is, to hear what their impact is
mhm.
about the policies, the more that we can have a greater understanding about who's being harmed and who's being helped, and what solutions we can come up with that will move our society forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I was telling him about this this podcast and telling him
Yeah.
about, how you and I met and the dialogues that we want to have. And he was very excited about it. And as I said, he wants to come on and give his
Yes.
perspective to things. And I told him that you moved to Jamaica to get away from this country. And I don't know what his story is about how he came here, but
Did he have a response or reaction to that? Like a whoa, what? I mean, I'm curious about that.
let me think. I don't think he really had a reaction one way or the other. It was, I told him that that you had ancestral roots to Jamaica, and so you were out, and that was where you wanted to be. And yeah, I don't remember him really having a reaction to that I either saw or heard from him on that.
Responses.
But
I would be curious about because there's a lot of people that have migrated here and are migrating here to be able to build back in on the islands, and that's what they're doing. And their plan is to return to the island. But what's needed is to have the capital that you can raise in the U.S. from like having a higher salary, a higher income.
right.
And so, because I just met a young person who is doing that very thing, having his house built in Jamaica and on family land and property, but is working in the United States and has been here since they were a young person, like 11, and so grew up in the educational system, but grew up in the educational system with family and parenting having knowledge of some other type of historical understanding.
Yeah.
And so and so knowing how to like negotiate the space, but having a vision to not remain in the United States and be able to have a better life experience as they get older.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. You're bringing me back to we were talking about Amanda Seales' turn on a show called Surrounded on
Hmm.
YouTube, and
Yes.
she was one of the people that were countering her was talking about um, systemic. They were talking about systemic racism. Does it exist? Is it real? Does it continue to oppress? And one of the I think it was a young woman that got up and was in the hot seat talking to her about it, was saying, I've known lots of Black people that have been able to make it, and so that means there is no systemic oppression. I don't know why people can't. Yeah, I know. Oh,
Ow!
I know. I know.
Ouch!
Yeah, it was a little hard to watch.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it was hard to watch. But Amanda was saying, she said, well, and one young man that got up, and I mentioned to you before that she asked him at one point, she's like, are you acting? Because the things
Mhm.
that he was saying were just so bizarre. And he was young. He looked like he was in his 20s. And she asked him where he was from. Were you born here? And he said, no, he was born in Angola. And he
Mhm.
came here with his parents young, but his parents were from Angola. And so
Mhm.
she challenged him to say, you didn't come, your parents were raised somewhere else and came here. She said there's a
Mhm.
very different
Experience.
experience that happens for Black Americans who are born and raised here, or maybe even not born, but raised here in the systemic issues. And certainly if they were born here and their parents grew up here, then you don't have she was supposing that his parents had a different way of approaching how to navigate these systemic racist
Absolutely.
systems because they grew up somewhere else and they
And
and
then because the systems are benefiting them. So like
right, right,
it's your entry point into the system that you have to be in consideration of,
right.
right? When
Yeah,
you come from the land and there is no entry point into the system, like it's very minimal. Like you can participate, but there's no entry point into the system. You're participating in the system, and you get
you're
what you
giving
get,
all of your
but you
labor and
don't have
all
a
of your
thing,
skill set and all of your things for
and
no
you sit in
yeah,
a debt system of slavery. But
right,
when you're coming from someplace else and you get to choose your entry point, most of the time your entry point is a high level of education. Most people that are coming from Africa get to go to really good universities on a student visa or whatever, which is also being challenged right now by the
right,
current administration.
right.
But and so you're coming in, you're able to participate and be educated in a certain way. You're coming from a certain amount of resource because Africa
Mhm.
does have resource. Most of the folks that I have experienced that have come from Nigeria or Angola or anything like that are coming from people in their community that have like their political figures, their doctors, their lawyers, or whatever. And so they have the access and ability to come and get in with within the US system in a way that helps to elevate their experience in their life. And a majority of them also take those resources back and continue to build up their community, which I think is right, which is a thing to be able to do.
Right.
But you do come in with a different entry point and a different need, because living on the island, as a person who can say that I live on the island, resources are very, very limited. So when you think about you going to a place where you can get the resources to then increase how much access you have to resources from where you come from, you're going to appreciate that system more than anything.
Yeah.
Which is why it's ridiculous that folks are believing that migrant populations are coming here and don't want to participate in the system, because you're coming here to participate in the system to be able to sustain your life in some type of way.
Right.
So it's,
and they work way harder and way, than any of us that look like me that have, grown up in this system and have access to all of the privileges that we have access to all the time. Yeah, I mean, and Amanda Steele's mother was from Grenada, so she even identified that. She's like, I am a similar, product of that. She said, I was born here, but my mother's from Grenada, and she came here, and so the learning that she got from her mother, all of the things. So she's like, you can't look at it's not apples to apples when you're comparing it to the experience of Black Americans, especially those who are at least 2 generations, if not longer, of being in the system, being born into the system, is way different than anybody that, and it doesn't denigrate, it's not denigrating they're still impacted by systemic racism when they come here, but it's a beautiful way to say that your entry point has to be in consideration when you talk about that story. And so, I encourage everybody to go watch it. It was really interesting, surrounded on YouTube. So, but anyway,
let's get surrounded by as many people as we can and see if we can elevate and expand our knowledge and understanding of where people are coming from and what entry point they have in the system in the United States.
Yes. Yes.
That is real.
Yes. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, as you move throughout your day, continue to ask yourself,
Why do I give a
fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.